On January 4th, 2016, the then St. Louis Rams filed for relocation to move to the Los Angeles area for the 2016 NFL season. They were among three teams, the others being the Raiders and the Chargers, that had filed for relocation to Los Angeles. But what if the Rams had stayed in St. Louis? You know, we always think St. Louis, the Cardinals, what a great sports city. The main issue with the Rams, the stadium, an ownership group that got a little bit greedy, that wanted more, and I will give them credit, it did work out for them, becoming the Los Angeles Rams, playing at the super stadium that is SoFi, the most expensive stadium in history, subsequently winning the Super Bowl a few years later with a young superstar head coach Sean McVay, and becoming the third most expensive NFL franchise. But they actually did have a plan if they were to stay in St. Louis, with a potential brand new stadium that already had a name, National Car Rental Field. Yes, the alternate history. Could you imagine if the Rams had worked out some type of deal right on the water? Now, this stadium, to me, reminds me of Lincoln Financial Field with the Philadelphia Eagles. I like it. It's a nice outdoor stadium, and it looks pretty sweet, but apparently the fans in St. Louis hated the name, National Car Rental Field, and there was an article before they left St. Louis to potentially change the name to Enterprise Field. I just thought that was a funny thing. But yes, so let's talk about this, our alternate history. Let's dive right in. The number one thing, we all know they would have to get a new stadium. The Edwards-Jones Dome was completely obsolete all the way back in 2016. That's part of the reason they moved, so they would have to be able to fund that new stadium. They would stay put in St. Louis, and the Rams would continue. I wonder what the future of the Rams would be. Would they change their logo? Would they keep their colors? I'm guessing they would just keep everything and move into the new stadium, and you would have to figure maybe at some point they would get better, because when they were in St. Louis, Todd Gurley played like one season when they were in St. Louis, I remember, and then they moved, and he really broke out, and that's when they ended up getting Sean McVay, and the whole thing kind of came together. But those last, I would say, decade when they were in St. Louis, they were a horrifically bad team. They were like the NFC's version of the Browns almost after the greatest show on turf was no more. They were pretty bad. And if you remember when the Rams moved into their temporary home, the LA Coliseum, this was before the Coliseum's renovation where they completely changed the seats. And I'll be honest, it was pretty brutal to look at, the Coliseum before the renovation. Now, the Coliseum has since received a beautiful renovation done by USC because they play their home football games there, and now it does look good, but they had to play there for multiple seasons as SoFi Stadium was being built. But if St. Louis keeps the Rams, that obviously changes the plan when it comes to SoFi Stadium. Right now, you have the Chargers and the Rams playing there. You have a stadium that is the mecca of the NFL. $6.4 billion if you adjust to inflation. Would that thing even be built if there was just one team? Would maybe it be the LA Chargers and the LA Raiders possibly? And then that would open up a spot for Las Vegas to get a team, possibly from Buffalo, because there was a rumor before the Buffalo Bills ended up getting a new stadium and everything, Ralph Wilson Field, which is what now is called Highmark Stadium. It's been one of the worst stadiums. Buffalo is a very small market, and before the Josh Allen era, Buffalo had this massive playoff drought. They weren't drawing very well. Could we see an alternate scenario where, let's say for the sake of it, there were multiple proposals of both of the Raiders coming from Oakland to LA, and they would be the Los Angeles Raiders, and then you have the Los Angeles Chargers, the Chargers moving from San Diego. That would open up a spot for Vegas, possibly to take a team like the Buffalo Bills and turn them into the Las Vegas Bills, depending. Now, they ended up getting the stadium, the funding for it, and Buffalo is currently building the new Highmark Stadium. I think a lot of things came together for Buffalo, including their team got better, which the overall sentiment in the city. They wanted to keep their team, and they end up paying for it. With the taxes, it all works out, and the rest is history. Buffalo will keep their NFL franchise, but it is an interesting alternate universe, and then that brings the Jacksonville Jaguars into the picture. If St. Louis keeps the Rams, could you also see a scenario where the Jaguars would possibly move to LA or even Las Vegas, depending, because you also have the situation with the Raiders. Maybe the Raiders still do go to Las Vegas, but then that would still free up another spot if they want two teams in Los Angeles. Or would the Chargers get Los Angeles to themselves, which obviously would not require a bigger stadium like SoFi, and there's multiple renderings of different stadiums for the Chargers if it was just going to be them moving to Los Angeles. There were really 3 teams rumored to go to Los Angeles, and when it comes to the Jaguars and them possibly relocating, the rumors about London, the London Jaguars, that was never going to happen. Logistically, it would just be a complete nightmare. But the Jaguars, if you go back to like 2017, 2018, them relocating would have been not surprising at all. And I still don't think they're completely out of the woods yet when it comes to relocation. But the good news for the Jaguars is there's really no direct relocation threat. Like 4 or 5 years ago, you could say, okay, Vegas is definitely getting a team. Someone's going to be relocating there. 7 or 8 years ago, you could say, okay, the NFL is obviously going back to LA. I mean, come on. With how big of a market it is, and not only do they get one team, but they get 2. But right now, it's kind of muddled. Where would the Jaguars go? Would they go to Austin, Texas? There was a rumor a few years ago that maybe the Bills might be talking to Austin, Texas about a relocation because that city is growing pretty significantly. Would they go to Toronto, Canada, up north? That raises multiple questions in terms of expanding the NFL outside of the lower 48. There's really no right answer right now for the Jaguars in terms of relocation, and they are possibly getting this massive stadium renovation. It's a $2 billion project, but it will require significant taxpayer money, which is going to have to be voted on and agreed upon by the citizens of Jacksonville. We know that can sometimes derail stadiums when it comes to the public funds, or maybe the Jaguars owner will just fork over more money for that to happen. But you could see in an alternate history timeline for the NFL, if St. Louis is able to stay and keep the Rams and build National Car Rental Field, the Jaguars possibly and the Bills being the next team up in terms of being lured to either LA or Las Vegas, depending, and maybe those 2 teams are involved in it. And you also have the Chargers very likely going to LA. Or maybe the Chargers get LA all to themselves, and in that case, SoFi Stadium would never exist. There would be no need for a massive stadium that would cost that much money. You could still build a nice stadium, but there's no way one single team, a stadium's going to be around $5 billion for one team. That's just simply too much money. Now, if the Rams had stayed in St. Louis, would they have received significant fan support? I think they would have. I think the fan support would have increased. Obviously, with the brand new stadium that's outdoor, you're getting out of that ugly dome that was completely out of date. I just don't know if they would have experienced a similar amount of success as the current LA Rams have. Although it is funny that there's rumors that the LA Rams could tank this year. The LA Rams have a crazy salary cap problem. They've got Matt Stafford, who's really old. Seems like he gets injured every year now. And honestly, it really doesn't even matter because they just won the Super Bowl a few years ago. When it comes to the NFL, it really is a zero-sum game. Even if the Rams are horrible this year and they're able to draft like Drake May or Caleb Williams, the franchise is still in a fine spot. Just when you look at their history, because they just won the Super Bowl. If you win the Super Bowl, you're basically fine for the next 5 or 6 years. But obviously, it's not ideal. If you're an owner, you want your team to be competitive so you can sell stuff and merchandise and things like that. So when it comes to the Rams leaving LA, if they would have stayed, definitely a lot of things would have changed, including possibly the Buffalo Bills or the Jacksonville Jaguars relocating to be that second team in LA, or we could have seen possibly the LA Raiders, which would in turn create a need for a Las Vegas franchise, or maybe Vegas just doesn't get any NFL team, but I do think they would be looking at like the Las Vegas Bills. Imagine that market move, the Bills go from Buffalo to Las Vegas. That would be crazy, but it worked out the way it worked out, and St. Louis is, unfortunately for them, left without an NFL team. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.